everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. The topic is simple guidelines to ensure your question and answer Q&A session goes well. One of the things I see with presenters or people that are doing an update at a meeting, when they get challenged or asked questions, a lot of things start to fall down and they get a difficult left field, contentious, maybe angry question. And all of a sudden their ability to keep their credibility, their confidence, keep on message starts to fall down. So today I want to share with you some tips, some guidelines to help you set up and be more prepared with that formal Q&A session. Peter Dew's my name. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and what I love to do is help you find your voice so you can confidently, effectively share your message, share your ideas, make impact, change your communities, your customers, look after your clients, speak with the confidence and share what you've got to say. So welcome everyone. I'll start by sharing my screen. So simple guidelines to ensure a successful Q&A session. Now, please understand, I just want to clarify that this relates to when you're doing a prepared presentation. I'm not talking about someone asking you something as you walk down the street or those corridor discussions. It's when you've done a presentation, you've done an update at a meeting, you've done a project review, you've done a safety meeting or a toolbox session, and now you're into your Q&A, question and answer. So please participate, ask questions. I've got the chat box open, so anytime you want to say anything, just write in the chat box and I will, when it's the right time, I will come to that question. Participate and think. So think about when you've been hammered or struggled with a question you've been asked. What might have you done differently as a result of what I'm going to share with you today that might help you better deal with that Q&A? Because I think that's really important. It's about taking some of what you see today, some of what you learn today, and taking it into your life. So it's not just about thinking and listening and saying that's nice, it's about applying. So one of the things I encourage people to do is let people know up front. Let's say you're chairing a meeting. Set the rules for your question and answer up front. Let's say you're speaking at a conference or a seminar. Set the rules for your question and answer session up front. And when I'm running a longer workshop, the rule I let people know is please ask questions anytime. Please interrupt. Please challenge me. Please ask me to expand on what I'm talking about anytime you want to. When I'm presenting for 15 minutes, I will not say, please ask any questions as you go. The reason why is because someone will ask me a question in the first 5 minutes and I'll get sidetracked and I won't finish my content. If I was presenting for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, even 30 minutes like today's webinars, I would probably ask people, can you hold your questions to the end, please? Can you hold all questions to the end? I've left 5 minutes to deal with questions. And another rule you can put is, if I don't get to your question, if we run out of time and I don't get to your question, you've got my email. Please send me an email and I'll answer the question after session. I'll answer that question after the meeting because we have run out of time. So that's another rule that you can set up front. The rule I've set for today is type in the chat. Anytime you want to ask a question in the chat box, and I will deal with it at the appropriate time. If I know I'm going to come to it later on, I will park your question and deal with it then. So as you're going to a meeting, you're running a meeting or you're running a little seminar, what rules do you need to let people know? It's about managing their expectations. And let's say I've asked you to hold questions to the end, and 5 minutes in, you put your hand up and say, excuse me, Peter, I've got a really important question. Excuse me, Peter. I can now say to you, look, if you don't mind, can you please hold that question to the end? We all agreed up front that we'll hold questions towards the end. So set your rules for your Q&A up front. And how would I do that? Something like this. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to address this meeting. I've got 15 minutes and I've got a lot of content, and I know you're going to have lots of questions. So can I ask you all to hold the questions to the end? I'm going to say 5 minutes for questions. And if we don't get to your question, send me an email. All right, let's get started. So I'm now talking. So I've set the rules up front. I'm now talking. And someone says, oh, but Peter, I've got a really pressing question. I can say, look, we all agreed to hold the questions to the end. I want your question, but let me finish my content first. What rules will help your Q&A run smoothly and manage the expectations of the people that are going to be asking you those questions? When to have your questions. I've just covered that a little bit then. I'll take questions as we go. Leave questions to the end. Type questions in the chat box. I've seen some bigger conferences, people be hand little cards or post-it notes. It's a pink one. Can you please write your questions down on the post-it note? When you have one, put your hand up, and the concierge will walk around and he'll grab all the questions. We'll put them together and collate them, and I'll respond to as many questions as I can at the end of the session. Let people know when you're going to have the Q&A. Once again, it manages expectations. With my one-day workshops, anytime. With a half-hour presentation, can you hold them to the end? Or please type in the chat box if I'm online. Another important rule to set up front is to talk about the scope of what you're here to talk about, and by definition, what you can't talk about. And I kind of frame it a little bit like this. So think of, I'm here to talk about this. Yeah, my scope is within this box. That's what I'm going to talk about. Everything I talk about will be in here. I'm unable to talk about this. This is outside of the scope. I'm unable to talk about this. And I'm unable to talk about this. I'm unable to talk about this. And that way, if people ask you questions about this, you can say, look, as I mentioned, I'm unable to comment on that. They ask you a question about this, sorry, I'm unable to talk about that. So what does that look like? Let's say I've been asked to address a meeting about a new human resource policy. And I know that people are going to be a little bit angry and a little bit worried about their budget, their finance, how they're going to do this, because there's finance is tight, budget's tight, and they're going to be struggling. So this is how I might set the scope of what I'm here to talk about and what I'm not here to talk about. So thank you for inviting me to speak to this meeting. I'm going to give you a quick update on the new human resource policy around how we take annual leave, how we take COVID leave, and how we take parental leave. And I know there's going to be a few questions, and I'm unable to talk about the impact on your budget I'm unable to comment on how your finances, how your cost centres are going to deal with this. If you have any questions relating to finance, your budget, how much this is going to cost, you need to go directly to our finance team. I'm here to talk about the rollout and the implementation of the new HR human resource policy. All right. Let's get underway. First thing. So I'm talking away and then someone puts their hand up. And the question comes, Peter, but how can I afford this new HR policy? How can I roll it out? I've got no money. My budget's spent. I've been asked to save money. And you want me to do this new HR policy? How am I going to tell me how am I going to manage that, Peter? My response, look, yeah, I appreciate your question. I'm not here to talk about money finance. I'm here to talk about the logistics, the rollout and the implementation of the new HR policy, the new leave policy. How you're going to manage the finance, you need to go direct with your finance department. So what I've done is I've managed the scope of what I'm going to talk about, the frame to talk about and the frame I'm not going to talk about. Yep, so that's one way of making sure your Q&A runs smoothly. So just think, what am I here to talk about? What am I going to not want to talk about? Now, we're seeing a lot of politicians at the moment answering questions. They don't get permission to do this. They don't get permission to say, I'm here to talk about the new NDIS policy, because the journalists can ask them anything. So what about your environment policy? Are you going to introduce a carbon tax? You can't say as a politician hoping to be Prime Minister, excuse me, I'm here to talk about the NDIS. Different situation. In the real world, when you're asked to present or you're giving an update or you're giving a presentation on a topic, you have permission to let the audience know what you're going to talk about and what you're not. Can I encourage you all to be clear on that? Right. So that's the next rule. What to do if you don't know the answer? Once again, politicians don't get to do this when they're campaigning to be Prime Minister. But one of the things you can do if you don't know the question is take it on notice. That's a really good question. I don't want to mislead you. Let me find out and I'll get back to you by the end of the day. Especially in the workplace, when they might ask you some specific data. So how much have our absenteeisms gone up since COVID? What percentage of people are ringing in or staying home, working from home because they've got COVID? We'd like to know. So Peter, you would probably say, yep, that's an important question. I don't want to mislead anyone. Let me find out. I've got a spreadsheet. I can get back to everyone in the meeting within about 2 hours. Another thing you can do if you don't know the answer, you can ask everyone else in the room. Does anyone else know that? Especially if you're in a group of colleagues, you can say, look, I haven't read that newspaper article. Has anyone else seen that newspaper article? Can anyone else comment on that? I call that phone a friend, phone a friend. Would anyone else be able to answer that? Be careful when you phone a friend in a bigger presentation, because if you say, does anyone in the room know that answer, someone might take you left field and go down a rabbit hole and you then don't finish your content. But when you're in a group of colleagues around a meeting, can anyone else comment on that? Has anyone got any other ideas? I would use that to help flesh out an answer that I can't fully answer. Another thing I sometimes do, I am a medical scientist and I worked in pathology labs for 30 years. Often a doctor, a GP would ring up and say, Peter, so what do you think this might be? And what additional tests could I do? And I'd say, look, let me do a little bit of research and I'll get back to you within half an hour. I would then ring up a colleague in Perth, because I'd be in a small country lab, and one of the colleagues in Perth would be an expert in this area. They'd say, look, it could possibly be this, it might be this, let's do this bank of tests, and that should help the GP make the diagnosis. I'd ring the GP back and he'd say, gee, thanks, Peter, you know everything, which of course I don't. So that's another example of phoning a friend. So that's a really good question. I don't have the answer at my fingertips. I've got a colleague who specialises in human resource law. I've got a colleague who specialises in equal opportunity legislation. I've got a colleague who specialises in microbiology. Let me get back to you by the end of the day. But if you are Scott Morrison or Anthony Albanese and you're on live television and they ask you about, so what are the 6 steps that you would change in the NDIS that you just announced, you probably need to list those 6 steps. Taking it on notice doesn't look good. And that applies to all politicians. And here's the thing, we cannot possibly know everything about what we're talking on. It's okay to say, look, I want to be sure. Another thing that I'll do when I don't know the answer is I will go to what I know and then try and extrapolate a response as best I can. And it might go like this. So the question might be, so Peter, what would you do in this particular situation if you were working in a mine site? Look, really good question. I've never worked in a mine site, so I've got no mining experience whatsoever. But I do have experience working in pathology labs, and safety, health and safety is really important. Dealing with HIV, other viruses, we need to have a high level of quality and safety. So using what I know from working in a pathology lab, this is what I would think would be a good way to be safe and have good quality workmanship. So I'd use what I know. Certainly one thing not to do, if you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Don't make it up. Don't say, oh, yeah, 5 out of 10 sounds about right. So how many people have been away, called in sick because of COVID? Oh, yeah, about 275 people. Yeah, around 275 people. Don't make it up. You will be found out. Don't end with questions. Remember I said set the rules of how you're going to do with questions. So I'm going to hold my questions to the end. I don't mean the very end. I'm going to hold my questions to later. Or I'll take questions as we go, or type questions into the chat box. Please do that. The reason we don't end questions at the very end, it's called the rule of recency. And the last conversation you have, people remember. So if the last conversation you have, someone asks a question, if you leave your questions to the end and say, right, I've finished my presentation, I've finished my update, I've finished my discussion about the new human resource policy, are there any questions? And someone asks a question off topic, outside of scope, a difficult question that you don't answer very well, and then everyone goes back to work, the most recent conversation running through their mind, what they remember is that last question. So accidentally, that last question has hijacked your take-home message. So what I do is towards the end, in a short presentation, well, I'm going to pause for a moment. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Yep, I'll take those questions. And then when I've got maybe 5 minutes to go, maybe 2 minutes, I will say, right, okay, I'm going to end questions there. Now, remember, if you want to have a smooth Q&A session, set the rules up front, set the scope, don't make up answers. Feel free to take a question on notice and make sure you end on your core message. Then I'm going to zip it. Because if I don't, and I get a question about, well, so Peter, but how do you deal with hecklers? You know, I understand all this is nice principles, but then you get those hecklers that just won't shut up and they're at you all the time. And all of a sudden, I'm talking about hecklers and you think this presentation is about dealing with hecklers. It's about how to set up a good methodology so you have a good Q&A session. So rule of thumb, generally I won't end with questions. I'll leave questions towards the end, but I'll save 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, depending on how long I need to sum up. All right. Next tip. And yes, why not deal with hecklers? How do you diffuse hecklers? So that difficult question, that person that keeps coming back. One of the rules you can set, and that was tip number 1, set how you're going to handle the question. One of the rules I sometimes talk about, especially if it's controversial. So let's say you're talking about downsizing, restructuring, reducing budget, defunding a little not-for-profit housing place. Sorry, you've got no funding anymore. And that's the purpose of your meeting or your presentation. You can anticipate what questions you're going to get. So one of the rules you can put up front is, so thank you for inviting me to present on this update, this policy update. I know there's going to be lots of questions. Can I get agreement within the room that we only have 1 question per person? 1 question per person, please, because I want to cover as many as I can and I don't want to leave any questions out. Now, your heckler is the person who's going to ask more than 1 question and their hand's going to go up. It's because you've set the rule up front, you can say, look, okay, thank you. We did agree on 1 question only. This is your second question. I do value your question. Please send me an email. I've got another question over here. So that's one of the little strategies to deal with hecklers. Those people that keep coming at you, make a rule up front in your introduction. So thank you for inviting me today. I've got a lot of information to cover. I know there's going to be lots of questions. Can we all agree in this room? 1 question per person. Now, clearly you can't tell your boss or your director, but in a general forum where you're giving an update, a human resource update, a project update, a finance update, you can set that rule to reduce hecklers. They do it sometimes at AGM, annual general meetings. So how can we deal with hecklers? Your preparation is important. What don't you want to ask? What question, if I ask, is going to make you feel a bit uncomfortable? Prepare answers for that. Are you delivering bad news? Are you delivering good news? Are you downsizing? Are you defunding? Do your preparation. Who's going to be in the room? Is there anyone you need to be aware of? Do you need to change your language? Do you need to tone it down? Do you need to be a little bit more assertive, more confident, stronger? Do you need more statistics? Do you need more data? Because the doubters in the room, the knockers, the people who don't believe it, the anti-vaxxers, the anti-whatever, what statistics, what scientific evidence do you need for this group versus another group? Praise them. Thanks for that question. That's a really unusual question. A little bit outside of scope, but yeah, great question. Find some point of agreement. Look, I think that's outside of scope. I don't agree with that, but I think together we'd have to agree that we need to do something to address climate change. Anticipate tricky questions, get back to them, take it on notice. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, very specific. And I need to find out, let me get back to you. We can agree to discuss after. Thanks for that question. It's a little bit off topic. Morning tea's coming up. Let's have a chat at morning tea. So that's taking it outside of the room. I've seen speakers do that when it's an emotionally charged question and someone's been involved, maybe with some sort of violence. And, so how would you deal with this? I was involved in a scenario that's quite emotional. And for psychological safety, look, I really want to have a chat with you. I think it's important I discuss what you've just raised, but I would like to take it out of the room. So I'm just going to park that. Let's have a chat at morning tea. And I'll look after that person because I know they're emotionally invested in that question. Involve them. All right, so how would you do that? Okay, you don't agree with me. What would you do differently? So there's just several tips. You can use a blend of them. What's going to work best to deal with your heckler? All right. My new book, a lot more about questions in my new book. That's a difficult question. Mastering the art of effective off-the-cuff speaking. It's online. The ebook is $9, and I will post you a hard copy, 105 pages. I'll post that to you for $25. I think it's online. And I've got a tip sheet, 10 rules to make responding to questions easier. The tip sheet underpins a little bit of what we covered today in this webinar in this 30 minutes. That's available. Send me an email and I will make sure that you get the tip sheet. In summary, when are you going to have your Q&A? As we go, save them towards the end. Some rules, 1 question per person. Can you write your questions down on a bit of paper? Can you write in the chat box? Rules. Scope. I'm here to talk about this. I can't comment on this. I can't comment on this. I'm here to talk about the new HR policy. I can't talk about the budget, the financial implications. If you don't know, take it on notice. Does anyone in the room know? I've got a colleague who specialises in that. Let me get back to you. A few tips to diffuse hecklers, involve them, take it outside the room, and don't end with Q&A, just in case the last question is left field and hijacks your core message. When you do a prepared presentation, you always come back and nail your ending. Summarize what you've just said. Have a call to action. And if the question dilutes or overrides your call to action, accidentally that last question becomes your new call to action. Upcoming webinars, 6 different ways to end your presentation. I've just highlighted the importance of ending strong, and ending with question and answer is not one of the ways to end your presentation. How to organize and structure a speech, tips to make PowerPoint presentation more effective. Upcoming webinars, 30 minutes, they're all free. We record them, so if you can't attend, we can still make them available for you. Upcoming workshops, nothing in Perth, a little bit in Karratha. Peter Dew's my name. You know how to reach me, peter@peterdew.com.au. My website, you've got my phone number. Any further questions, if I can help you in any way, let me know. Just remember, make sure you set rules around your Q&A, the scope, don't end with questions, don't make it up, do take it on notice, phone a friend. What 1 or 2 things are you going to do differently the next time you have to do a presentation, an update, a report to a meeting, and you know there's going to be questions? My name is Peter Dew. Good luck in your Q&A sessions moving forward. Bye for now.